The sex ed version of this talk that I give is called Bring on the Cringe. Because my all-time favorite kid, the kid I've taken the most joy from working with, he's a kid with oppositional defiant disorder. He deals with the world by pissing people off. He's very good at it. He used to get my attention by kicking me in the shin. And when I wrote the sex ed program for the gifted school we worked in, he was like, hold on a second. What are we going to do? And I explained it to him. And he's like, that sounds really cringy. I'm like, it is a little cringy, but it's important because at some point it's going to help you get dates and navigate the world. And, and he goes, oh, cool. Then bring on the cringe, Dr. Matt. And so that's forever, he will be the reason I call it that. So let's talk about dating. Let's talk about sex. That always gets a bigger titter in America, but I realize that we're in Europe. So what are we doing? We're going to talk about aspects of the gifted brain and how neurodiversity impact dating, relationships, and sex. We're going to focus on the impact of overexcitabilities on managing those relationships and discuss strategies we can use to navigate the world. I'm going to start by talking about a colleague of mine, Lynn. She's wonderful. Not only are gifted and creative adults misperceived, misdiagnosed, and misunderstood by others, but they also misunderstand, misperceive, and misdiagnose themselves as well. And while we think about that in the intellectual space, and we think about that in the academic space, and we think about that sometimes in the social space, we don't tend to think about it in the sexual romantic spaces. So we are therefore making space to do that right now, because this is a vital aspect of who we are. And we are here to serve the entire person, not just in math class, not just in university, not just in applying for a job, but going on that date, getting married, doing those aspects of life that are vital. So you're all probably very familiar with this graphic, because this is a gifted conference. Short version is that gifted people develop asynchronously. A neurotypical 12-year-old is 12-year-old in their academics, intellectual, social, emotional functioning, and physical functioning. A gifted or neurodiverse person is going to be all over the place. You might be 12 years old, intellectually 15, socially 10, emotionally 9, and physically 11. These aspects are going to really inform the conversation we're going to have about sex, dating, romance, because when you get into the idea of what you, giant air quotes, should be doing, you may not be ready for that because of your neurodiversity. Not because you're broken or weird or different, but because you might be 15 and everybody else is going on dates and they're holding hands and they're doing boy-girl parties, and you're like, I would rather play Dungeons and Dragons with my friends. I hereby give you permission to play Dungeons and Dragons with your friends. Because I'm going to argue, hopefully pervasively, that by playing Dungeons and Dragons with your friends, you're going to develop the skills and confidence that someday will lead you on those dates and get you invited to those parties. You don't have to do it like everybody else, because you're not everybody else. I like this conceptualization of asynchrony a lot, because if you see the circle, like what people would expect for someone who's XYZ age, and then you can see how you map yourself on that circle. I think it's just a nice way to think. It sort of is a scalar quality of I am this much more or this much less than what other people would expect. Here is one of my all-time favorite graphics. This is our friend, the genderbread person. Now, you will notice that it's the genderbread person because all people have all of these aspects. Now, we could do the rest of our time just on this graphic. I'm going to skip some pieces of it because we have other stuff to get to. But the idea here is that identity, how I perceive myself, may not sync up with who I am attracted to, and it may not sync up with my biological sex, and it may not sync up with how I present in the world. One of my examples of this is from going to the Center for Talented Youth camp in America. I had a good friend there. I did 4 years of camp with him. And at camp, he was gay. At home, he was not. And that language might seem offensive to someone, right? But here's the thing. His dad was literally a small-town pastor at in a very religious community. He could not be gay at home, but at camp he could be. So this is a person whose identity and his attraction could present one way in one space and a different way in another space. And making space for all of those things and how they may not always sync up is a vital part for not only connecting with each other, but developing empathy for each other. I also want to point out here that there are aspects of this that are sexual and romantic attraction. For all people, not all people have the same sex drive. Not all people have the same romantic drive. There is space for that. You may be demi-romantic, aromantic, asexual. They're all places on a spectrum. So a lot of times people will think that, where's my identity in the LGBTQ space, but then struggle with their physical attraction, their sex drive, those pieces of it. That's a part of this as well. So making space to learn more about the asexual community or the demisexual community can give you the community and support that you need to support that kind of emotional development. I have a kiddo that I work with right now who is really worried because he's gone to university, and he's like, well, Dr. Matt, at university, people go to frat parties, and they drink alcohol, and they have sex. I mean, in the movies, yes. I was like, but you don't drink, you don't like frat parties, and I don't know where you are on sex. And he goes, I don't really want to. Is that bad? I'm like, dude, no. If you're 20 years old and you do not have that sex drive, you do not have that aspect of yourself, there is nothing wrong with you. That is just a way your body is manifesting in the world. Now, if he meets somebody and that fire gets lit in him, fabulous. But that's where he's at right now. And we meet people where they are every single time. Here's our alphabet soup. What I will refer to in this conversation is the LGBTQ community. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. Q is queer, but obviously there are many things here. It's worth noting just for a second that the word queer in many spaces, at least in the US, is used as a slur. However, the queer community has reclaimed it and said, no, it's our word and y'all can't have it. So it would be weird of me to be up here giving a talk on this and using a slur, but I just want to build some context around that. So 3E, when I started doing research on this, the word for being gifted and LGBTQ was twice other. And I will tell you this, my friends, I hated that term. I didn't like it one bit. It sounded weird. It sounded literally othering. So I said, I'm not going to do that. But then 3E comes out, and I like that term. So I'm going to introduce you to the term 3E if you haven't heard it before. The idea here is that neurodiverse people already feel different. We're already very aware that we're not like other people. And if you are twice exceptional or gifted and you're LGBTQ, you've got difference on top of difference on top of difference. You're going to feel very unlike other people, but you're in good company. There's a great article here on how to support 3E learners. When you get these slides, you'll see that. Using inclusive language, you'll notice I use the word Folx a lot. Folks to me is a gender-inclusive term, but we don't want to assume that people are cisgender. We don't want to assume that they're heterosexual, and they don't want to assume that they're monogamous. And we use this language all the time. More than one person has been like, oh, I saw your wedding ring. Tell me about your wife. Now, I'm cisgender and heterosexual and monogamous. I feel like it's important to clarify that last piece. But you don't know that about me, right? I am fairly flamboyant for a male, and many people might think that I'm gay or bi. I'm not. That's not how I identify. But he's saying, using that language, regardless of your intention, puts me on the spot to either out myself or argue with you. I know what physical education looks like in the United States. For my European colleagues, physical education, when we play games in school, like physical activities, football, basketball, that sort of thing, how do those teachers usually divide up the classroom? Boys versus girls. Very common. Not great. So I tell my gym teachers when I do this talk, and I specifically call them out because gym teachers usually don't feel very seen at these conferences. I'm like, hey, instead of boys versus girls in whatever you're going to play, count off by ones and twos. Because if you've got a kid who's trans, or if you've got a kid who's questioning, or a kid who's gender non-binary, you are forcing them to out themselves or putting them in a distressful space. And that's not fair. And usually people say, well, I didn't mean to. Well, duh. Doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. So this conversation, like a lot of the conversations I have about sex, is meant to be sex positive. Having an open, tolerant, and progressive attitude towards sex and sexuality. There are three key aspects of this. All consensual sexual activities are fundamentally healthy and pleasurable. Yes, even masturbation. The health benefits of masturbation way outweigh any of the bad stuff, even though there's a significant social stigma around it. There are no moral distinctions among the types of sexual activities. I don't care how you get down, as long as you enjoy getting down. And we need to grow our own passions and have time and space to receive them. Carving out this kind of time, even if it's 30 minutes at the end of a long week of a long conference, because how much time do we get to sit and think about our own sexuality? Very little, especially thinking about it proactively. Y'all signed up for this. No one made you come here. I was talking to some colleagues of mine back in the States about this, and one of them said something that has always stuck with me. She says, I only think about my sexuality when I'm catcalled on the street. Because in those moments, I'm very aware of my womanhood, right? I'm very aware that she's like, I'm a curvy woman, and I like tight jeans, and I'll be walking down the street, so some guy will be like, woo! And she's like, in that moment, I'm very aware of my sexuality. But she did this, she tightened her body. That's not pleasurable. That's not fun. That's not positive. We want to make the spaces to sit with these feelings and learn this stuff intentionally. The word here that I want, the biggest thing here, the biggest takeaway from this is whatever you do, it needs to be safe, sane, and consensual. If it's those three things, congratulations, we're sex positive. That's a good thing. See? Safe, sane, and consensual. It's pretty important. All right. Now, having gone through good sex education, I'm going to pivot back into the give it space and talk about our good friend, Dabrowski. Now, the idea here is that awareness of our higher emotions allows us to direct them towards authenticity, where intelligence, where our gifted brains serve our emotional lives. The single most important word to every gifted person I've ever met is authenticity. If I may speak directly to my teens for a second here. If I was like, hey, young people, let's rap. What's on the TikTok these days? Would you guys keep listening to me? I would hope you wouldn't, frankly, right? I resolved early in my career, I don't want to be that guy. Listen, I'm not cool. I'm a professional nerd. I can't keep up with what you guys are all into, so I'm not going to try. I'm going to empower you guys to inform me. Just like I would empower all of you to inform me or inform the people in your lives about what matters to you. So overexcitabilities are areas that have heightened reception and response to stimuli. It shows up as increased sensitivity, awareness, and intensity. We have psychomotor excitability, emotional excitability, imaginational excitability. See, I did the European three, right? Just like Heidi Klum on Project Runway. Intellectual and sensory. For the psychomotor OE, obviously, easily can be misdiagnosed as ADHD because there are people who love movement for the sake of movement. In a relationship, your psychomotor OE is going to show up in several ways. Let's talk about your sex drive. Let's talk about how to manage it and to communicate it. Let's talk about introverts versus extroverts. It's all about energy exchange, right? As an extrovert, I'm getting super charged up by this talk. My wife, who is very introverted, would be like, this is pure hell. Either way, Energy is being exchanged right now. So if you're an introvert and I've been around people a lot today, go back to your hotel room and take a break. It's okay. Time together versus time apart. Gifted people can be very cognitively rigid. We can have certain ideas and stick with them. Things that are okay in relationships, not doing everything together. Things that are okay in relationships, not only expressing your sexuality through sex with each other. You can still masturbate during a relationship. That's appropriate. It helps if you have a conversation about it, especially if that's part of like a psychomotor thing for you. That's fine. What can you see in them that they can't see? Oftentimes, especially those of us with psychomotor things, are doing things with our bodies that other people don't see, or that we don't see in ourselves, that other people need to tell us. I am notorious for air drumming. I play the drums. Some people air guitar. I air drum. So you'll see me. I'll be walking the street like, because I'm playing music in my head. My wife, early on dating, she's like, "What are you doing with your hands?" I was like, drumming? But to have any kind of relationship, making space for those things is an important part of it. And going back to my introverts, perhaps you're in an environment at school or at work where you are not around the people who you feel most comfortable with. So you hold up all your stuff all day, and then you come home or you go to your place where you see that person you feel comfortable with, and then it just goes, bleh. We call this an introvert dump, because you couldn't feel like you talked to all the people all the day, and now you're like, now I can talk to the person, which is great. You got to communicate around it. We're going to talk about meta communication a lot, talking about talking. So just say like, hey, can I introvert dump to you, Tracy? See? So I'm going to talk Tracy's ear off later. She has no idea what she signed up for, right? But communicating around it is a way to express that energy. Emotional overexcitabilities. My colleague Josh Shane said a gifted person will get their feelings catastrophically hurt when most people wouldn't even have feelings. In a relationship, when there are interpersonal needs and sex drives and other families and other friends involved, holy shit, lots of opportunities to get your feelings hurt. So we think about our sense of justice. We think about how we talk about our feelings. We make space for the things that are triggers for us. The only way to deal with them is to acknowledge that they're real. In a relationship, we accept all feelings regardless of intensity. If we accept emotional intensity, it allows us to work through the problems, not pretend they don't exist, or shame somebody about having them. Here's an interesting thing. I am terrified of clowns. Anybody else in this room scared of clowns? Raise your hands. All right. I have a good friend who he's in a polyamorous relationship. He has 3 partners, one of whom has a clown sexual fetish. She enjoys to have sex dressed as a clown. Tracy, take over for a second, would you? But the idea here is, that's my personal nightmare. I would probably not be able to be in a sexual or romantic relationship with this person, but can she come over to my house for dinner? Yeah, that works for me, right? We can talk about it. I am allowed to be scared of clowns just like she's allowed to be sexually aroused by them. That just means that that might be a part of our lives we don't share. We teach people to anticipate our responses. We know the things that are overstimulating for us, that are understimulating for us. My wife knows that at weddings, I get very overstimulated. So, like, we'll be dancing, I'll be like, because it's a lot for my brain. We name our feelings to activate our parasympathetic nervous systems and calm ourselves down. And this is the core tenet of my therapy practice. You are allowed to feel however you feel about whatever you feel. It's what you do with those feelings that matter. Imagination. More active and engaged imaginations involved by fantasy. We may mix truth with fiction. We may escape boredom, but that comes at a cost. If you're talking to your partner and they're telling you about your day, and you're like, this is so boring, and you just start playing some tapes in your head, and they're like, what did I just say? You're like, Practice being present. Practice returning to this moment, just like we talked about the other day, right? Being present moment focused helps us be our best selves. And if you're struggling with this, say it out loud. Communicate that. What I really like is the shiny tangent, or what I like to call is you put two neurodiverse people in a room. That reminds me of, and they tell a story. And they go, oh, that reminds me of, and then you tell a story. And that reminds me of, and then you tell a story. That have nothing to do with anything. But if you can anticipate the shiny tangent and help people regulate themselves through it, you're going to stay largely on the conversational track. In a relationship, record our thoughts and ideas somewhere. It can be really helpful to journal this and then go through and to figure out what are the 2 or 3 most important points, and then say that to your partner, because then they might get lost for the forest for the trees. Understand, embellishment is an anxiety strategy. If your partner's like, hey, we're getting to a point in our romantic relationship where we might have sex soon. How many sexual partners have you had? The typical male cisgender thing is to be like, 97. It's like 4. But there's a cost to lying about that. Aesop once said that if you tell the truth, you never have to remember anything. It's good, right? Yeah. I didn't say it was Aesop, but still. Practicing when to be present, following your ideas, but scheduling time to do so. One of the things that helps a lot of neurodiverse people in romantic and sexual relationships is to schedule time to be intimate. Like, oh my gosh, I have so many interests, I have so many things going on. We're going to have sex on a Tuesday afternoon. And if you talk about that, that's not only not weird, it's actually kind of sexy, because you're acknowledging that it's not going to happen the way you want it to, but you value the person enough to go about it a different way. Intellectual OE, I've never been able to find this as a GIF. I would love to someday, but I think that's the intellectual thing. Psychotic. Marked need to seek knowledge and understand information. We have incredibly active minds. We can be very impatient with people who don't share what we share. In a relationship, get it done, then go deep. Hey, here's what you need to know to do this thing. The first time I took my wife to a Ultimate Frisbee game, I spent the entire 45-minute car ride going over like detailed bits of Ultimate Frisbee strategy to the point that she literally said, stop. Oh, this team's playing this team. That's great. I get that part. That's good. Then I can go deep. How do you learn? How do you learn best? How do you want to learn? Some people need to read about it. Some people need to watch it. Some people need to talk it out. Perspective taking is key, understanding that other people may feel differently about things. What roles can you play in a relationship? When are you the teacher? When are you the learner? When do you need to learn together? Connecting with like-minded communities. And big thing in a relationship, if somebody comes to you and they're having a bad day, you can ask this question. Do you want me to listen, or are you looking for advice? It is probably the question that has saved my marriage, because like a lot of mental health professionals, I'm like, I can fix it. Not great. Ask if you can add something. If they say no, respect it. Sensory OE is probably one of the biggest pieces of navigating sexual and romantic relationships as a gifted or 3E individual, because there's a lot of stuff about sex and romance that's sensorily challenged. So what areas of your life are overstimulating and pleasurable? What areas of your life are understimulating or unpleasurable? People can feel manic or out of control when they're overstimulated. And if that shows up in the bedroom, it might scare your partner or partners. Being aware of that stuff is so important. Start with your clothes and your food. Actually, a young woman I worked with once, she was a very well-behaved kid, then all of a sudden she started becoming a huge behavioral problem in school. And she was acting out, she was getting out of her chair, nobody knew what was going on. And, they call me in because I'm the school counselor, and I'm like, all right, we got to get to the bottom of this. We have several sessions. And finally I was like, I'm missing something with you. What am I missing? And she was like, you don't want to hear it. You're a guy. Sure, but give me a shot here. Like, let me help you. And she goes, fine. It's this goddamn underwire bra. And I was like, I don't understand that at all. However, help me understand it. The pressure of the metal wire was hurting her chest. It was making it hard for her to catch her breath. But because she felt like she couldn't say that to anybody, she was taking that energy and using it to act out. What that helped me do was call in a female colleague who could help her with that. They got her a bralette, which didn't have the underwire on it, and all of a sudden, the sensory problems went away. But you think about the things that happen when we go through puberty. We are sweatier. Hair is growing in places, and then we must deal with that hair in some way. You're wearing different kinds of underwear. You're wearing different kinds of clothes. One of the gifted girls I see in therapy, she's, her body is changing a great deal as she goes through puberty, and she's always tugging up her shirt. She's like, how much cleavage am I showing? Is it too much? Is it not enough? Is it too much? Is it not enough? This is not a problem we had 2 years ago. It's a problem we have now. And I say problem, it's just that it's like a thing. But yeah, our sensory needs are a big aspect of who we are, and I personally think that it's one of the big unspoken secret shames of the gifted world is that we have all these sensory needs and we don't talk about it. Okay. Talking about sensory stuff, this is one of my favorite stories. So I went to college or university at Wake Forest University in North Carolina, and they had sex ed for college freshmen, which is very progressive, at least in the United States. And they bring in these 2 graduate students, and they sit down with my hall of freshman boys. So I'm going to paint you a picture. There are 24 18-year-old guys who are in college, right? And like, we're going to get laid, bruh. And we're going to drink some beers, dude. And so these 2 grad students come in and they're talking to us about sex, safe sex. And they're both very attractive humans, right? They're like TV attractive. And the female, her name was Monica. Monica says, okay, who can put a condom on a banana? So it was sex ed 101, right? So this guy Nick's like, yeah, I got it, Monica. Banana, condom. You're welcome. He goes, I've got lots of practice. Like, sure you do, chief. Right? So she's like, you did a really good job. You were very effective at putting on a condom. I would like you to try it one more time, please. Oh, Nick's like, sure, bruh. And he gets there, he goes to put the banana on the condom, and Monica gets right up here. God, you're so hot. I want you. Oh, I want your body. Do it already. Do me now. Do me now. Do me now. Do me now. Nick drops the condom, drops the banana, gets bright red. And she's like, I'm showing you this because you are very rarely going to have sex where it's a very calm and formal process. Care to initiate sexual protocol? Why, yes. Thank you. Like, it doesn't go down like that. And if you have sensory needs, being physically activated, being aroused and passionate and horny is gonna make stuff harder to do because some things are harder, if you get my drift. And here's the thing, I tell this story all the time to the 2E and 3E kids I work with because our needs there are higher than neurotypical people's needs. We are that much, the barrier for us being disrupted is lower, and where our brains might go to it goes to a much different space. So make space for it, practice it, think about it, communicate that to your partners, because it might be harder for us. In a relationship, create an environment that limits offensive stimuli and provides comfort. If you're somebody who doesn't like to have sex in places that are not a bed, then perhaps you should have sex in places that are a bed. 5 years of grad school for that one, guys. List and have ways to access positive sensory inputs, scheduled sensory and private time. Like we said, schedule time for sex. You can also schedule time for decompression. Thinking about relationship between sensory input and your behavior. And planning or seeking out appropriate opportunities for being the center of attention. Get back here and love me! Conflict is a part of every relationship. Platonic, professional, romantic, sexual. It's important to know that there are parts of it that are natural and parts of it that are dangerous. It is okay to argue with your partner. It is okay to disagree with your partner. It is not okay if your partner or partners are belittling you or threatening you. If those things are happening, there are lots of resources that exist, and they're at the back end of the slide. Conflict does not mean your relationship is failing. 3 important things about neurodiverse people in relationships. 1, we are more sensitive than most people, so we are much more likely to have conflict. 2, we are super-powered verbal machines. Because, oh, if you want to go, I'll go. Oh, you want to know what's wrong with you in a relationship? Let's do this, right? And then 3, because of those 2 things and our cognitive rigidity, we might go to a place of, great, we had a fight, we're done. Take a breath, guys. It's going to be okay. Meta-communication, we talk about talking. If you're in a conflict with somebody, conflicts often happen in the car or at the end of the night. Can we solve this problem right now? Probably not. Let's sleep on it. People say, don't go to bed angry. To me, that's bullshit. If you cannot solve the problem at 11 p.m., you are not going to solve it by midnight. And your skills are drastically falling off a cliff, right? Hey, I know you're upset. I know I'm upset. But hold on. I still love you. I still value you. Can we sleep on this, or can we schedule a time to get back to it? Because it's diminishing returns right now. If you're in the car and you're about to show up at a party or a wedding or your in-laws' house, and you're having an argument that's festering, do we need to drive around for another half hour and deal with it, or can we table this till later? I'm not saying that you're going to magically come to an answer, but I'm saying by having these conversations, by talking about talking, you give yourself a chance to solve them. And remember, because of all gifted people, we must use our powers for good. You could unsheath your mental sword and be like, I'm going to cut you up now. Don't do that. Take a breath and be very thoughtful with the words you choose to use. Communication is the single most aspect of all relationships. In the absence of information, our brains create our own narratives. So, if I say that I'm going to meet you for coffee later, right? And I say, hey, at 5:30, let's meet for a coffee. At 5:30, I don't show up. Probably not a big deal. 5:40, I'm not there. 5:45, 5:50. Maybe your brain is going, oh, Dr. Matt is making fun of me. Maybe Dr. Matt was kidnapped. Maybe Dr. Matt is dead. Listen, I've been married for nearly 8 years now. If I don't text my wife when I'm leaving work, she's like, is he dead in a ditch? Which is weird because I work in the basement now. My commute is not very long. But still, hey, honey, I'm coming upstairs. Thank you. In the absence of information, our brains create their own narratives. If you're at a party and your partner is ignoring you, your brain might go to a space of they're cheating on me, they hate me, they're going to break up with me. Or maybe your partner is just very excited to see these other people. Get that information. Have the conversation. Setting boundaries, limits, triggers, strengths, and safe words for those of us in sexual situations. Picking your spots. And then gifted people tend to be very clear and concrete communicators. We don't so much do the subtleties. Check-ins. Hey, are we okay? Hey, are we all right? What's going on? And don't assume. It's very easy to assume. If you were in my talk the other day, we talked about the power of prosody. Prosody is the intonation and how we deliver words. Within the sexual dating spaces, prosody becomes a huge thing. If you go on a date with somebody and you walk them to their door, there's a big difference between good night and good night and good night. But if you can't pick up on those differences, you're going to miss a lot of first kisses. I know because I used to. So, wait, I had a what? So where do we go from here? We set expectations, we use meta-communication, we educate ourselves. Your partner does not have to be, probably shouldn't be, all things to all people. Assume good intentions. Unless someone gives you a reason to think they're ill intent, they're probably trying to do the right thing. Do all things with love, and schedule the time to manage your OEs. The last thing I want to focus on here, and this is where my work as a psychologist and a work as a sex educator comes together. It's all about consent. Consent is where we sign for affirmative consent in all physical interactions. If you guys have spent time around me in this conference, you'll notice I've hugged a lot of people. You'll also notice that whenever I hug somebody, Tracy, what did I do when I hugged you before? You asked if you could. I asked. I'm a big dude. If I come up to you, I'm like, give me a hug. It's hard to say no, right? He's the keynote. I have to give him a hug. No, you do not. You'll also notice that if I can't give you a hug, I will do something like a fist bump or a high five because that's in the negative space between us. It gives you an opportunity to say no. Consent is a dialogue. It's respectful. It's every single time. It's appropriate terms. It's bidirectional. Both people have to give consent. And then it's knowing about your values and your partner's values. Consent is not assumed. This can be tough for gifted people who are rigid. Well, I went on a date with you and I made out with you last Thursday. That means I can go out on a date with you and make out with you this Saturday. Probably not, unless they say yes. It's not carried over. It's not forever. And this is probably the most important thing, retroactive. Because guys will say to me, Dr. Matt, she said it was okay afterwards. Yeah, that doesn't mean anything, guys. If you are in a dangerous situation, you're going to say yes to feel safe. And then you're going to say it was okay afterwards because you still feel like you're in danger. And so many people have been in that situation. I have been in that situation myself. So consent must be affirmative, proactive, and frankly, enthusiastic. Going back to that prosody idea, big difference between sure and yes! I don't know if that's how loud y'all get, but do your thing. All right, if we can roll this clip, hopefully it should work. I did not draw this stick figure guy. If it doesn't work, it's no problem, but. He's mocking me. All right, no worries. The clip is in the works cited. It's the consent as T video from the Thames Valley Police from the UK. It is easily the best video on consent I have ever seen, and it's very British. So I won't try and do the accent. Oh, what? No worries. Woo! Click. All right. So takeaways. You are worthy of love. You are worthy of love right now. Who you love, and how that shows up for you is up to you. It's an inalienable human right. 2, you're worthy of great relationships. I cannot tell you how many gifted and neurodiverse people have come up to me. It's like, listen, I'm just going to marry whoever will put up with me. Guys, no. Our partner or partners should love the weird, quirky stuff about us, not tolerate it, not pretend it doesn't exist. 3, our needs have an inherent place in your relationships. If your partner likes to be intimate in public and that makes your anxiety spike, it's going to be awfully hard to be sexually aroused if you're having a panic attack. Your needs matter. How you navigate that and how you come to a conclusion on that, that's going to be up to you or your partner or partners. But just because they want it doesn't mean you have to want it too. And just because you want it doesn't mean they have to want it too. Relationships are about communication and compromise. Your past relationships do not define you. I will admit that until I met my wife, I really thought that I was going to be one of those people who just sort of ends up with somebody because I'm weird and I'm passionate and I hold people to a very high standard. And I never thought I would meet somebody like that. The women I dated before my wife were, what's the correct term for this? Not great. Took a second, right? Yeah, you got there. Your boundaries have to be honored. Everybody has boundaries in how we communicate and how we are physical with each other, or how we are romantic or sexual with each other. You have boundaries. They need to be honored. And if you don't have the relationships you want, do something about it. The worst thing that happens is that nothing changes. Okay, I'm a little bit over time, so I'll tell you guys one quick story. So in my early 20s, I lived in the city of Boston in the United States. And I had a job that was not a good fit for me. I worked in travel sales. I did not fit in. Everybody who worked there was really cool. I'm, as we have determined, not cool. And I used to go to this bar that was it was set up like somebody's living room. They called it Our House, which I really liked. And there was a waitress there I had a huge crush on. And we would flirt, and I never really knew where I stood. And one day I'm leaving the bar, right? And I've had a couple of beers. And I'm walking back to my apartment, and I stopped. I said, wait a second, Matt. Because I wasn't Dr. Matt then. I was just Matt then. Wait a second, Matt. You are going home alone right now, again. And you have a crush on her. You might as well go ask her out. Because you're going home alone. If she says that she doesn't have a crush on you, nothing has changed. If she says yes, you've got someone to look forward to, or you've got hope. So I turned around, and I stormed back into the bar, and she's like, why are you back here? Did you forget your credit? I was like, go on a date with me! She's like, I'm sorry, you just shouted that. I was like, I know, I'm sorry, I'm anxious. Can I take you out to dinner sometime? She goes, about damn time. I went out the next night, and I went on 3 dates with her. And they weren't very good dates. But I did it. And that's what matters. If you don't have what you want, go after it. The worst thing that happens is that nothing changes. As in dating, as in life. You guys are a fabulous audience. Give yourselves a big round of applause.